Sometimes the people who save our lives are the ones the world never notices until it is almost too late. The afternoon sun shimmered across the crystal blue water of the Maple Ridge Country Club pool, casting dancing reflections onto the white stone deck where laughter, splashing children, and quiet conversations blended into the comforting soundtrack of a perfect early summer Saturday in Northern Virginia. Families relaxed beneath oversized umbrellas, while waiters carried tall glasses of iced tea and lemonade between neatly arranged lounge chairs. No one expected anything extraordinary to happen that day. Certainly no one noticed the quiet man sitting alone near the lifeguard station, watching his 8-year-old daughter carefully practice her swimming strokes in the shallow end. Ethan Walker looked like the kind of father people passed every day without remembering. His faded baseball cap had been washed so many times the navy blue had turned almost gray. His t-shirt carried faint traces of chlorine from years of maintaining neighborhood pools, and his worn work boots rested beside the chair he had chosen because it gave him the clearest view of Lily. Since losing his wife 4 years earlier, watching over his daughter had become second nature. Every smile she wore mattered more than anything else in his world. Lily surfaced with a bright grin and waved enthusiastically. Ethan smiled back, raising his hand in return before quietly checking the deep end again, a habit formed through years of part-time lifeguard certification and countless afternoons spent around water. Across the pool, a woman stepped onto the marble deck wearing a simple white cover-up over a modest navy swimsuit. She wore oversized sunglasses, no jewelry except a thin silver watch, and carried herself with effortless confidence, though exhaustion lingered beneath every careful movement. Her name was Victoria Sterling, but nobody there recognized the billionaire CEO whose face occasionally appeared on financial magazines and national business broadcasts. After months of board meetings, shareholder battles, and endless flights across the country, she had escaped for one anonymous weekend. Without assistance, security teams, or cameras following her every step. She wanted nothing more than a few quiet hours where no one expected decisions worth millions of dollars. She slipped into the cool water with a relieved smile, letting herself drift toward the deeper section while closing her eyes for just a moment. Nearby conversations continued. Children laughed. Music floated softly from hidden speakers. Then something changed. Victoria suddenly reached for the edge that was no longer within arm's length. A sharp cramp tightened through her leg, stealing both balance and confidence. She tried to remain calm, but each attempt to move carried her farther from stability. Her breathing became uneven as panic quietly replaced composure. Around her, people assumed she was simply enjoying the water. No one recognized the silent distress behind her controlled expression. Except one man. Ethan was already on his feet before anyone else understood what he had seen. He handed Lily his cap with a reassuring smile that somehow erased every hint of urgency from his face. "Stay right here, sweetheart," he said gently. "Daddy will be back in just a minute." Then, without hesitation, without asking who she was, and without knowing that the woman struggling only yards away controlled a business empire worth billions, Ethan Walker dove into the water, carrying with him nothing except quiet courage and the instinct to help another human being. Victoria barely remembered reaching the edge of the pool. The only thing that stayed with her was the steady voice telling her to breathe slowly and the reassuring grip that never once made her feel frightened. Within minutes, the pool staff gathered around her with bottled water and clean towels while a resort nurse confirmed that she was simply dehydrated and overwhelmed by an unexpected muscle cramp. Several guests applauded the quick rescue before returning to their conversations as though nothing remarkable had happened. Ethan accepted none of the attention. He simply smiled politely, nodded once to the staff, and walked back toward Lily, who threw her small arms around his waist the moment he reached her. "I knew you would. Help her," she whispered with complete confidence. Ethan brushed a loose strand of blonde hair away from his daughter's face and smiled. Anyone would have done the same. Lily looked back toward the woman sitting quietly beneath a shaded umbrella. "I do not think so," she answered softly. Ethan did not reply. He only picked up their worn canvas bag, collected their towels, and together they walked toward the parking lot where an aging blue Ford pickup waited beneath the afternoon sun. Victoria watched them disappear through the windshield of a vehicle old enough to have seen decades of family road trips. She wanted to call out. She wanted to thank him properly. But before she found the right words, the truck had already rolled out of the parking lot and vanished behind a row of oak trees. That evening, Victoria sat alone in the presidential suite that the resort manager had quietly upgraded without realizing she owned the company that held controlling interest in the property. The city lights shimmered beyond the balcony, while untouched room service cooled on the dining table. She opened her laptop to prepare for Monday's board meeting, but every spreadsheet blurred together. Instead of financial projections, she kept remembering a faded baseball cap, kind brown eyes, and a little girl who had smiled with absolute trust in her father. Before going to bed, Victoria called her executive assistant. "I need a favor first thing tomorrow morning." There was a brief pause on the line. "Anything, Miss Sterling. Do not involve my security team. Do not contact the press. I only need help identifying someone." The next morning arrived with clear skies and fresh summer air. At exactly 8 o'clock, Victoria stood inside the resort security office beside the operations manager. Multiple surveillance screens displayed every corner of the property. She watched the recording from the previous afternoon in complete silence. There he was, calm, focused, never hesitating, never looking around to see who might be watching. After the rescue, he simply returned to his daughter as though kindness required no audience. Victoria leaned slightly closer to the monitor. "Can you pause it there?" The manager stopped the video just as Ethan turned toward the exit. His employee badge, attached to a temporary maintenance lanyard, became visible for only a second. The image was not perfect, but the first name was clear enough. Ethan. The last name took another enhancement before finally coming into focus. Walker. Victoria quietly repeated it to herself. Ethan Walker. The operations manager searched the temporary contractor records. "He is not one of our regular employees. He filled in yesterday for a maintenance company that services several community pools around the county." According to this file, he left before his shift officially ended because his daughter had a swimming lesson nearby. Victoria looked at the address listed beside his name. It was less than 20 miles away. She closed the folder gently, thanked the manager with a warm smile, and walked toward the lobby, carrying nothing except her car keys and a growing determination. For the first time in years, the most important appointment on her calendar had nothing to do with billion-dollar negotiations. She simply wanted to find the man who had quietly walked away after saving her life. Victoria drove herself instead of calling a driver. For years, she had traveled inside tinted vehicles surrounded by schedules, meetings, and security protocols. Yet that morning, she wanted something she had almost forgotten how to experience. She wanted to arrive as an ordinary person. Her luxury sedan rolled away from the polished downtown skyline and onto quieter suburban roads lined with maple trees, neighborhood diners, family-owned hardware stores, and Little League baseball fields already buzzing with weekend games. The navigation guided her into a modest community where every mailbox looked different because every homeowner had painted it by hand. Children rode bicycles along cracked sidewalks while sprinklers watered small front lawns. Nothing about the neighborhood reflected the world of private jets or corporate boardrooms. Yet Victoria found herself slowing the car, taking in details she usually sped past without noticing. She finally stopped in front of a small white cottage with faded blue shutters and a neatly repaired wooden porch. The roof showed signs of careful patchwork instead of expensive replacement. A weathered blue pickup truck sat in the driveway beside a collection of gardening tools organized with surprising precision. Bright flowers bloomed along the walkway, not because a professional landscaper had designed them, but because someone had planted each one with patience. Victoria remained behind the steering wheel for a long moment. This was not the home of a man looking for sympathy. It was the home of someone who quietly cared for everything entrusted to him. Before she could gather the courage to step out, the front door opened. A little girl with shoulder-length blonde hair skipped onto the porch carrying a small green watering can almost as big as her arms. Victoria recognized her immediately. Lily carefully watered every flower as though each blossom deserved individual attention. She hummed softly to herself before noticing the unfamiliar car parked at the curb. Their eyes met across the yard. Instead of looking nervous, Lily offered a warm smile that seemed completely natural. She walked closer but stopped politely near the garden gate. "Hello," she said. "Are you looking for somebody?" Victoria smiled back, suddenly aware that billion-dollar negotiations had never made her feel as uncertain as speaking with one kind child. "I hope so," she answered gently. "Does Ethan Walker live here?" Lily's face brightened instantly. "That is my daddy." She opened the gate without hesitation. "He is fixing Mrs. Henderson's fence in the backyard. Daddy is always fixing something." Victoria stepped through the gate, noticing handmade birdhouses hanging from tree branches, colorful chalk drawings decorating the front walkway, and an old porch swing that had clearly been repaired more than once instead of replaced. Every corner of the property reflected care rather than wealth. As they rounded the side of the house, the steady sound of a hammer echoed through the quiet morning air. Ethan stood beside a wooden fence, measuring a replacement board before carefully securing it into place for his elderly neighbor. He looked exactly as he had the previous afternoon, calm, focused, and completely unaware that one of the most influential business leaders in the country had traveled across town simply to thank him. Mrs. Henderson, a cheerful woman in her late 70s, handed Ethan a glass of iced tea. "You work too hard," she said with a grateful smile. Ethan laughed softly. "If I slow down now, this fence will never forgive me." Lily giggled before calling out, "Daddy, your pool lady is here." Ethan turned around with a puzzled expression. The moment he recognized Victoria, surprise crossed his face, followed almost immediately by quiet concern. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked sincerely. He did not ask why she had come. He did not mention gratitude or expect praise. His very first thought was whether she had fully recovered. Standing there beneath the gentle shade of an old maple tree, Victoria realized she had spent years surrounded by successful people, but it had been a very long time since she had met someone whose first instinct was simply to care about another person. Ethan set his hammer on the workbench and wiped his hands with a clean shop towel before walking toward the front yard. There was no excitement in his expression, no expectation that someone had come to reward him. He simply offered the same calm smile Victoria remembered from a pool. "I'm doing much better because of you," she said sincerely. "I realized I never thanked you properly." Ethan nodded gently. "You already did. You're standing here healthy. That is more than enough." Victoria hesitated before opening the small leather envelope she had brought with her. Inside was a personal check with an amount large enough to replace the roof, pay off the house, and secure Lily's education for years. She extended it toward him with both hands. "Please accept this. It will help me feel that I've shown my gratitude." Ethan glanced at the check only briefly before quietly folding the envelope closed and placing it back into Victoria's hands. "I cannot accept this," he said. Victoria blinked in surprise. "Why not?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because yesterday I did not rescue a bank account. I rescued a person." The words settled into the still morning air. Even Mrs. Henderson, who had been trimming roses nearby, paused for a moment before quietly returning to her gardening. Victoria looked down at the envelope, unsure how to respond. Throughout her career, she had solved problems with contracts, investments, bonuses, and charitable donations. Money had always opened doors, yet for the first time in years it felt completely powerless. "Then let me do something for you," she insisted softly. Ethan smiled, but there was no trace of pride in his face. "If you truly want to thank me, then the next time you see someone who needs help, be the first person to walk toward them instead of waiting for someone else." Victoria searched his eyes, wondering if he realized how unusual his answer sounded. "That is all?" she asked. "That is everything," Ethan replied. Lily skipped across the yard carrying 3 glasses of homemade lemonade on a weathered wooden tray. "Daddy says lemonade tastes better outside," she announced happily. She handed one glass to Victoria before sitting on the porch steps with her own. Victoria accepted it with a grateful smile. The lemonade was slightly too sweet, the ice already beginning to melt in the warm sunshine, and somehow it tasted more refreshing than any expensive drink she had enjoyed in years. She looked around the little porch. A hand-painted bird feeder hung from one corner. Wind chimes made from old silver spoons danced gently in the breeze. Children's books rested on a small wooden table beside, gardening magazines, and a worn Bible whose pages had clearly been opened many times. Nothing matched. Everything belonged. Lily pointed toward a flower bed beside the walkway. "Daddy planted those after my mommy went to heaven," she said innocently. "He says flowers remind people that beautiful things always come back after winter." Ethan lowered his eyes for a brief moment before smiling at his daughter. "Someone has been listening to my old stories." Lily giggled. "I always listen." Victoria felt an unexpected tightness in her chest. She had spent years living in a mansion with more rooms than she regularly used. Yet this modest home seemed filled with something no architect could design. Peace, respect, quiet love. As she prepared to leave, Ethan walked her to the gate. "Drive safely," he said. Victoria paused before opening her car door. "May I ask you one question?" Ethan nodded. "Yesterday, when you jumped into that pool, you did not know my name. You did not know anything about me. Why did you come so quickly?" Ethan looked toward Lily, who was laughing with Mrs. Henderson while chasing butterflies across the front lawn. Then he answered with the same quiet certainty that had guided every decision she had witnessed since arriving. "Because someone else's daughter would have wanted her mother to come home too." Victoria stood speechless. She slowly climbed in her car, but instead of starting the engine immediately, she remained there watching the little white cottage through the windshield. For the first time in a very long while, she realized that the richest person she had met all year did not own a fortune. He owned a heart that had never learned to measure people by what they possessed. Victoria drove away from the little white cottage, but she did not return to the city immediately. Instead, she parked beside a quiet neighborhood park where children chased one another across the grass while parents gathered beneath tall oak trees. She sat behind the steering wheel with the windows rolled down, letting the warm breeze carry the sounds of ordinary life through the car. Her phone buzzed with reminders about conference calls, investment reports, and an upcoming interview with a national business network. For the first time in years, she silenced every notification without reading a single one. Her thoughts remained with Ethan's final words. They were simple, almost ordinary, yet they echoed louder than the speeches she had heard inside luxury hotels and executive boardrooms. Later that afternoon, she called her executive assistant again. "I need you to help me learn something," she said. "Not about his finances, not about his credit history. I want to know who Ethan Walker really is." Her assistant sounded surprised, but immediately began gathering publicly available information. The report arrived the following morning. Victoria expected to find dramatic headlines or hidden achievements. Instead, she found something much quieter. Ethan had served several years as a volunteer youth swimming instructor after losing his wife. He worked maintenance jobs for neighborhood pools, repaired fences, painted homes, and accepted almost any honest work that allowed him to be home before Lily returned from school. There were no lawsuits, no debts beyond a modest mortgage, no luxury purchases, and no social media accounts seeking attention. There was only a steady pattern of helping people. One elderly couple wrote a glowing online review explaining that Ethan had repaired their broken wheelchair ramp on a Sunday afternoon and refused payment because, in his words, neighbors should never send neighbors an invoice for kindness. Another family shared that he had spent an entire Saturday fixing a leaking roof after a storm because their insurance payment had been delayed. A youth baseball coach mentioned that Ethan quietly repaired damaged equipment every spring before the first practice so children could play safely without anyone knowing who had done the work. Victoria continued reading long after the report ended. None of these stories had made local news. None had earned awards or public recognition. They existed only because grateful people had taken a few moments to leave heartfelt comments online. She leaned back in her chair and whispered to herself, How many people have I overlooked simply because they never asked to be noticed? Across town, Ethan finished another day of work before picking Lily up from the public library. She climbed into the truck, carrying a stack of books nearly as tall as her backpack. "Guess what?" she asked excitedly. "Mrs. Parker says I read faster than anyone in my class." Ethan smiled proudly as he helped buckle her seatbelt. "That does not surprise me one bit." On the drive home, they stopped at a neighborhood grocery store. Ethan carefully compared prices before placing fresh vegetables, bread, milk, and Lily's favorite apples into the shopping cart. Lily reached for a package of cookies, but quickly looked at the price tag and quietly put it back without saying a word. Ethan noticed. A few minutes later, he picked up the same package and smiled. "I think excellent readers deserve a celebration once in a while." Lily's eyes sparkled with joy as she hugged his arm. They laughed together while walking toward the checkout lane, completely unaware that someone across the parking lot had recognized Victoria Sterling sitting inside her parked car. She had not followed Ethan out of curiosity alone. She had simply wanted to understand the rhythm of his ordinary life. Watching father and daughter laugh over one small package of cookies, Victoria realized something she had almost forgotten. Happiness did not always arrive wrapped in extraordinary moments. Sometimes it lived quietly inside everyday choices, shared smiles, and a father who never allowed his daughter to doubt that she was the greatest treasure he would ever have. Over the next several days, Victoria found herself inventing reasons to slow down. She postponed one business dinner, declined another television interview, and delegated meetings she normally would have insisted on leading herself. Every unexpected hour she gained seemed to pull her toward the quiet neighborhood where Ethan and Lily lived. She knew she could not continue appearing at his front door without reason. So when she learned from Mrs. Henderson that the community was organizing a Saturday garden cleanup for the local elementary school, she signed up under nothing more than her first name. When Saturday morning arrived, Ethan was already there unloading bags of mulch from the back of his old pickup, while volunteers laughed and greeted one another. Lily wore oversized gardening gloves that slipped off every few minutes, making everyone nearby smile. Victoria arrived in simple jeans, a long-sleeve shirt, and an old baseball cap. No designer labels, no chauffeur, no security detail. Ethan looked pleasantly surprised when he noticed her carrying a pair of work gloves. "I did not expect to see you here," he admitted. "Victoria Smaid. I remembered your advice. You said the best way to say thank you is to help the next person." Ethan nodded with quiet approval. "Then, you picked the right place." The morning passed with simple conversations and shared work. They planted flowers beside the school entrance, repaired wooden planters, and spread fresh mulch around young maple trees that would one day shade future generations of children. Victoria had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without hesitation, yet she struggled to keep a wheelbarrow balanced on uneven ground. Ethan noticed before saying anything. "Try lifting from the handles a little earlier," he suggested kindly. She followed his advice, and the wheelbarrow rolled forward much more smoothly. She laughed at herself. "I think this is harder than running a meeting." Ethan smiled. "Flowers usually do not argue with you." Lily burst into laughter. "Daddy tells jokes when he thinks nobody notices." For the first time in years, Victoria laughed without wondering who might be watching. Around lunchtime, volunteers gathered beneath a large oak tree where neighbors had arranged sandwiches, fresh fruit, homemade cookies, and pitchers of iced tea. Children played tag across the grass while grandparents shared stories from decades earlier. Victoria sat beside Ethan on a folding chair, holding a paper plate instead of attending a catered executive luncheon. The simplicity felt strangely comforting. "Do you ever wish life had turned out differently?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked toward Lily, who was helping a younger child plant bright yellow marigolds with endless patience. "Every parent dreams of giving their child more," he answered honestly. "But I have learned that more money and a better life are not always the same thing." Victoria remained silent for several seconds. Those words settled gently into her heart. She realized she had spent years building a remarkable career while quietly sacrificing birthdays, family dinners, weekends, and friendships. Success had filled her calendar, but left many rooms in her life empty. As the afternoon came to an end, Lily proudly carried over a small clay flower pot she had painted herself. Tiny blue flowers decorated the sides, along with uneven yellow letters that spelled the word hope. "This is for you," Lily said, placing it into Victoria's hands. Because flowers grow better when somebody believes in them. Victoria looked at the handmade gift, then at Ethan. "She gets that from you, does not she?" Ethan smiled softly and shook his head. "I think children arrive in this world already knowing how to be kind. Adults spend the rest of their lives trying to remember." Victoria carefully held the little flower pot as though it were something priceless. It was worth only a few dollars in materials, yet it carried more sincerity than every expensive corporate gift she had received over the past decade. As she drove home that evening with the tiny flower pot resting safely on the passenger seat, she realized that without noticing when it had happened, she was no longer visiting Ethan because she felt grateful for being rescued. She was returning because, somewhere between ordinary conversations, shared work, and Lily's innocent laughter, she had begun to feel something even more extraordinary. She had finally found a place where success was measured not by wealth, but by the quiet way people chose to care for one another. The weeks that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm neither Ethan nor Victoria had planned. Sometimes she stopped by after work with fresh peaches from a roadside farm stand. Other afternoons, she joined Lily at the public library, listening patiently as the little girl excitedly recommended her newest favorite books. For a brief while, life seemed wonderfully uncomplicated. Then one ordinary Tuesday morning, everything changed. Victoria arrived early at corporate headquarters for a quarterly strategy meeting. As the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, conversations stopped almost instantly. Several employees looked away too quickly. Others lowered their voices without lowering their curiosity. Her executive assistant met her outside the conference room carrying a tablet with visible concern. "There is something you should see." Victoria accepted the device. Across multiple business websites and social media platforms, photographs had already begun circulating. One image showed her planting flowers beside Ethan at the elementary school. Another captured Lily, handing her the small painted flower pot. A third showed the three of them laughing outside a neighborhood grocery store. None of the pictures were inappropriate. None were misleading. Yet the headlines beneath them transformed ordinary moments into dramatic speculation. Billionaire executive spending secret weekends with unknown laborer. Mystery man captures heart of corporate leader. Is a working-class father about to enter high society? Victoria quietly set the tablet on the conference table. "Who released these?" she asked calmly. "A freelance photographer recognized you," her assistant explained. The story spread overnight. Before the meeting even began, several board members entered with expressions that revealed their priorities long before they spoke. One cleared his throat. "Victoria, public perception matters. Investors are asking questions." Another added, "We are not criticizing your personal life, but the headlines are distracting from the company's performance." Victoria listened respectfully without interrupting. After years in business, she understood how quickly public opinion could become a financial concern. Across town, Ethan knew nothing about the board meeting until Mrs. Henderson knocked gently on his front door, holding her morning newspaper. She looked worried. "I thought you should see this before Lily does." Ethan unfolded the paper. The same photographs filled nearly half a page. Reporters had already identified Victoria as one of the country's most successful chief executive officers. They had also identified him as a single father working multiple maintenance jobs. The article repeatedly emphasized the enormous difference between their lives, treating kindness as though it were a surprising headline instead of a normal human response. Ethan folded the newspaper carefully and thanked Mrs. Henderson for bringing it over. He never complained. He never criticized the reporters. Instead, he quietly looked toward the living room where Lily sat coloring pictures at the coffee table, completely unaware that strangers were discussing her family across the internet. That evening, Victoria drove to Ethan's house as she had done many times before. She found him sitting alone on the porch after Lily had gone inside to finish her homework. The handmade flower pot she had received weeks earlier now rested on the porch railing, blooming with bright blue blossoms. Ethan smiled politely when she stepped out of the car, but something had changed behind his gentle eyes. "I think people know who you are now," he said softly. Victoria nodded with regret. "I never wanted this to affect your life." Ethan looked across the quiet street, where neighbors watered their gardens and children chased fireflies beneath the fading evening sky. "My life is not the problem," he answered. "Lily deserves to grow up without cameras waiting outside her school or strangers deciding who her father is." Victoria felt her heart sink. "You think we should stop seeing each other?" Ethan remained silent for several moments before speaking. "I think some distances are not measured in miles. They are measured by the lives we ask other people to carry." The words were gentle, but they carried the weight of sacrifice instead of rejection. Victoria wanted to argue. She wanted to explain that none of the headlines mattered to her. Yet as she looked through the front window and saw Lily smiling over her homework, she understood exactly why Ethan was stepping back. He was not protecting himself from criticism. He was protecting the one person he loved more than his own happiness. 3 days passed without a single message between them. Ethan poured himself into work, leaving home before sunrise and returning just in time to help Lily finish her homework and read together before bed. Victoria buried herself inside conference rooms, investor briefings, and interviews she barely remembered once they ended. Outwardly, everything had returned to normal. Inwardly, both of them carried a silence that neither success nor routine could erase. On Friday morning, Sterling Holdings held its annual shareholder assembly in Washington, District of Columbia. Hundreds of investors, executives, journalists, and financial analysts filled the grand ballroom of a downtown hotel. The agenda included quarterly earnings, expansion plans, and a long list of corporate resolutions. Yet before the meeting officially began, reporters clustered outside the entrance with one question that refused to disappear. "Is there any truth to the stories about your relationship with a single father?" Victoria offered only a polite smile and continued walking. Inside the ballroom, several board members exchanged uneasy glances. One senior director quietly approached her. "You have an opportunity today," he said. "If you simply explain that he is someone you barely know, this story will disappear by tomorrow." Victoria thanked him for his advice, but said nothing else. Across town, Ethan was replacing broken fence posts at a neighborhood playground while Lily attended school. During his lunch break, another contractor handed him a phone. "Your friend is on every business channel," the man said. Ethan hesitated before accepting the device. The annual meeting was already being broadcast live. He watched only because he hoped the public pressure would finally end for Victoria's sake. Back inside the ballroom, the formal presentation concluded with strong financial results and enthusiastic applause. As the moderator prepared to end the event, Victoria unexpectedly returned to the podium. The room gradually became quiet. She looked across the audience before speaking in a calm voice that carried naturally through the hall. "Today I have been asked many questions about business performance," she began. "But there is one question I have not answered because it deserves more than a headline." Cameras immediately turned toward the stage. Reporters lowered their pens, waiting. Victoria continued without looking at her prepared notes. "Several weeks ago, I experienced a medical emergency at a community pool. Hundreds of people were nearby. Only one person moved before anyone else understood what was happening. The ballroom remained perfectly still. That man did not know my name. He did not know my profession. He did not know whether I owned a company or rented an apartment. He simply saw another human being who needed help." A quiet murmur passed through the audience before fading again. Victoria's voice grew even softer. "Afterward, I tried to thank him with money. He refused. I offer my gratitude. He told me to help the next person instead. I visited his home, expecting to meet someone who had saved my life. What I found was something even rarer. I found a father raising his daughter with honesty, kindness, dignity, and love that asked for nothing in return." Several board members slowly lowered their eyes. The journalists who had arrived expecting controversy found themselves listening instead of typing. Victoria took one final breath before speaking from her heart. If our society believes compassion should be judged by income, then we have misunderstood success. The man you have discussed in articles and interviews never sought publicity. He never asked for recognition. If anyone deserves respect today, it is the father who reminded me that character cannot be measured by a paycheck. Silence filled the ballroom so completely that the faint sound of an air conditioning vent became noticeable. No applause came immediately because no one wished to interrupt the moment. Miles away, Ethan stood beside the unfinished fence, still holding the borrowed phone. He looked down at the screen without saying a word. Around him, the other workers quietly removed their hats. None of them spoke either. For the first time since the photographs had appeared, the world had stopped talking about appearances and started listening to the truth. The weekend arrived wrapped in the quiet promise of early autumn. Golden leaves drifted across the sidewalks as a gentle breeze carried the familiar scent of freshly cut grass through Ethan's neighborhood. Life had slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm. Reporters had moved on to other stories. The cameras had disappeared. The headlines had faded. Yet one question still remained unanswered in two hearts that had learned the value of silence. Ethan was repairing the porch swing when he heard the soft sound of a car stopping at the curb. He looked up and immediately recognized the familiar sedan. This time Victoria stepped out wearing a simple cream-colored sweater, blue jeans, and comfortable walking shoes. There were no photographers, no executives, and no security. Vehicles following behind her. In one hand, she carried a modest bouquet of fresh wildflowers gathered from a local farmer's market instead of an expensive florist. In the other, she held nothing at all. Ethan walked toward the front gate with the same calm expression she had come to admire. Before either of them spoke, the front door opened. Lily hurried onto the porch after hearing the car outside. The moment she saw Victoria, her face lit up with genuine excitement. "You came back," she exclaimed as she ran across the yard and wrapped her arms around Victoria in a joyful hug. Victoria smiled through eyes that shimmered with quiet emotion as she hugged the little girl just as warmly. "I promised myself I would," she answered. Ethan watched the moment in silence. There was no awkwardness, no grand speech, only the peaceful feeling of people finding one another again. Victoria turned toward him and held out the bouquet. "These are for your garden," she said softly. "I thought your flowers might like a few new friends." Ethan accepted them with a grateful smile. "Thank you." They sat together on the old porch swing while Lily carefully planted the new flowers beside the others. For several minutes, they simply listened to birds singing in the maple tree and the gentle creak of the swing moving back and forth. Finally, Victoria spoke. "I spent most of my life believing success meant reaching higher than everyone else. Then I met a father who showed me that the greatest people are often the ones who quietly kneel down to help someone else." Ethan looked toward the little flower pot Lily had painted weeks earlier. The blue blossoms had grown taller, stretching confidently toward the morning sunlight. "Life has a way of teaching lessons when we stop trying to write them ourselves," he replied. "Victoria smiled. I'm not here because I need someone to rescue me anymore." She paused before continuing. "I am here because this place reminds me of the person I want to become." Ethan looked across the yard where Lily happily brushed dirt from her hands after finishing the last flower. "Then you're always welcome here." Just then Lily skipped back toward the porch with a bright grin. "Daddy," she said innocently, "I think our family picture has room for one more person." Ethan and Victoria exchanged surprised smiles before looking at the child whose heart had spoken without hesitation or fear. No one rushed to answer. No one needed to. Some truths arrived quietly enough to speak for themselves. As the afternoon sun settled gently across the little white cottage, neighbors waved from nearby sidewalks. Children laughed while riding bicycles, and the wind carried the soft music of the old chimes hanging beside the porch. Nothing about the house had become larger. Nothing about Ethan's bank account had changed. Victoria was still the chief executive officer of a remarkable company, and Ethan was still a hardworking single father who believed kindness should never expect applause. Yet both of them understood something that money could never purchase. A life built on dignity, grace, respect, and second chances would always become the richest home of all. And sometimes the greatest miracle was simply finding the people who reminded you that love begins the moment you choose another person's heart over your own pride.